Well, it looks like Gog and Magog are on the move. Does this mean Jesus is coming soon? That's a big question being searched for on the internet, and we're here at What You've Been Searching For. I'm going to give you my thoughts on that. Stay tuned. So as of this taping, Russia has invaded Ukraine about a week, I guess, at this point. And understandably, this is a trying time, a lot of anxiety from people out there. And as Christians, we've been taught that when we hear wars, rumors of war, things like this happening, we're to look up and we're to take it as a sign that Jesus is coming. So a lot of people have been searching on the internet now, wondering, is this an end times prophecy? Is Gog, which is typically in the Bible is Russia, the area around Russia? Magog is the leader of Russia, from what I understand, and that would be Vladimir Putin. Pretty scary guy. So again, understandably, a lot of people are searching for the question, is this an end times prophecy? Does this mean that Jesus is coming, is imminent? I'm going to take this in two parts. The first part today, I'm going to give you my just general reaction throughout my life to these kinds of things. I've been a Christian a long time. I've heard a lot of things like this, and I want to tell you how I take it and how I don't take it, and how I look at things like this, world news events like this. And then next time, I'm going to tell you what I look at when I think of Jesus' return. What I see the Bible, the most important thing or the biggest factor in determining whether Jesus is coming soon or not. So for just taking at face value the events of current events right now, this very scary time we're in, where Russia is invading Ukraine, and there's talk of nuclear war, and there's talk of nations rising up against nations, all these things that are very apocalyptic sounding to us. And it all goes back to some of the prophecies seen in Daniel and Isaiah, and some of the things Jesus talked about too. But as I said before, I've been a Christian a long time. I'm 62 years old. In my lifetime, there's been, I think I was on the cusp of pretty much the beginning of the Jesus movement, into the kind of the fading away of the mainline denominations, the old traditional style Christianity. I'm not sure with those churches there was a lot of attention paid to, is Jesus coming back again? But with the Jesus movement and some of the modern things that I learned early on as a Christian, there was a lot of talk back in the 60s and 70s of the rapture, of the tribulation, and of Jesus is coming again. There were lots of books. There was even a couple of movies, which, by the way, if you think we have bad Christian media now, check out a movie called A Thief in the Night. If you want to see some bad writing and some bad acting and some bad directing and bad production, check that one out. But it was about the rapture and about the second coming of Jesus, and it scared all of us 12-year-old kids to death back in the day. There was also a book that had really the book that had the most influence on me, or the media that had the most influence on me. It was called The Late Great Planet Earth by a guy named Hal Lindsey. And it was a huge bestseller. It really was kind of the definitive text on end times prophecy, eschatology, all these kinds of things. And what Hal Lindsey said in this book, him and other people, was that based on the prophecies of Daniel and Isaiah and the things Jesus said about the end times, the key to them was the establishment of the nation of Israel. And that happened in 1948. And when Jesus said the generation will not pass that sees the fulfillment of these prophecies about the 70 weeks of Daniel and about the abomination of desolation, the generation that sees this rebirth of Israel, which will be the trigger of all these things, will not pass before the end comes. Well, they took that to mean a generation being 40 years in the Bible. Typically, you do the math on that, and if Israel was formed in 1948 and a generation after that, Jesus will come, 40 years later is 1988. Hal Lindsey was a pre-tribulation rapture guy, so before the 7-year tribulation, we have to be raptured. 7 years before 1988 is 1981. So I read this book, and a lot of people read this book, and we spent most of the year of 1981 wondering if the rapture was going to take place then. Would we be caught up? Would we not be caught up? Would other people be caught up? And would we be left behind? It didn't happen. Okay? So a lot of people said, well, that must mean the rapture is post-tribulation. Or maybe the rapture is going to happen in 1988. So 7 years later, we all waited a little more skeptically this time. And Jesus didn't come back. The rapture didn't happen in 1988 either. So by this time, I was getting a little suspicious of these end-time prophecy predictions from people. I really haven't paid much attention to it since then. I think the last time I really heard anything on prophecy or even took note was 1989 into 1990, New Year's Eve, 1989. I was at a church service here locally with a pastor who was well known for his end times prophecy teachings, and he taught us that night. He said, we're heading into the 1990s, and this is what is going to happen in biblical prophecy in the 1990s. This is what will see happen throughout the 90s. One of the key things, besides the establishment of the nation of Israel with prophecy people, is the rebuilding of the temple. They always say they already have plans to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, and that's what will happen in the 1990s, is what this guy said. And I remember sitting there thinking, okay, I'm going to come back in 10 years, in 1999, New Year's Eve, and ask you, okay, did these things happen? And if they didn't, does this disqualify you from preaching on prophecy? I didn't do that in 1999 because in 1999 we had another concern. None of those things happened in the 90s, by the way, of course. Okay. But in 1999, 2000, we had another concern, which was called Y2K. And that was another thing that people were saying, this is big. All the computers in the world that run everything, when it switches over to the year 00, all the computers are going to think it's 1900. They're not going to know what to do. If you haven't heard about Y2K, if you're too young, Google that. It was quite a thing back in the day, but that was something we all expected to happen, and it didn't happen, and there was nothing to it. Shortly after that was 9/11, and 9/11 was a very apocalyptical event. If you were there, if you can remember at the time, a very scary event. We all watched in real time as those buildings came down, those planes went into it. And a lot of people thought that was a significant event that meant Jesus' return is imminent. So it's understandable that a lot of people are talking about this now, especially with the prophecies of Gog and Magog. But Russia's been on the move throughout history. Russia is quite the violent nation. Think of people all throughout history, especially World War II. Russia was a huge part of World War II. People don't even realize it. But think of the people of World War II thinking that this must be the end of the world. Jesus must be coming after this. But it didn't happen then either. All these things, keep in mind though, all these things do mean that we are closer to Jesus' return. I don't doubt that these are stepping stones towards Jesus' return. But it soon could mean 100 years from now, soon could mean 1,000 years from now. It's been 2,000 years since Jesus said, I'm coming back soon. Soon is a relative term in these kinds of things. And just because we're living in modern times in the West, in America, or as Christians, we can get caught up in thinking, because we've had it so good for so long, we can get caught up in thinking God won't let us go through difficult times. God won't let us go through wars and famines and persecutions. He'll rapture us up. He'll take us out of that. But that hasn't been the case through most of history. We've lived in a very unique, special time. We may be headed for the type of suffering and trouble that Christians throughout history have gone through. And there's no promise that won't happen to us. As a matter of fact, there is a promise that it will happen to us. And maybe it's our time as modern day Christians to have a little trouble, to know what it's like to follow God, to be a Christian, to be a witness for God in times of trouble and persecution and famine and war. Just because things are happening bad in the world does not mean we're exempt from it. Even our Christian brothers and sisters throughout the world that aren't in the West have been suffering all this whole time, and we've been taking it pretty easy in the West. So that's not to say Jesus won't come back tomorrow. We are to look up when we see these things happen, but we're not called to assume that just because there's trouble in the world, Jesus' return is imminent and we're going to be taken away from it. We're not. So that's why I don't take wars and rumors of wars as things that change the equation. If Jesus' return is imminent because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, his return was imminent the day before, too. So, again, keep in mind that Jesus is coming and that we have an assignment while we're here before he comes, and that is to make him known, to know him, to make him known, and to make his kingdom known. And that's what I'm going to talk about next week or next podcast. I'm going to show you what I really do look to in the Bible that tells me whether or not Jesus' return is imminent and how I should think about it. So hopefully you'll catch that. If you like this video, like I always say, please like. The like button's right there. Share it with someone who's worried. Share it with a Christian you know or a non-Christian you know that doesn't know what to think of world events. Subscribe to this YouTube channel and also go to ChristianPodcastCentral.com where there's more good video content like this. I'm Joel Fieri. This is what you've been searching for. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time.